My friends, I want to speak to you today about something that touches every single one of us. God's blessings. We often wonder, Lord, when will my breakthrough come? When will my prayers be answered? But let me tell you this, before God sends his blessings, he prepares you to receive them. Many of us get discouraged in the waiting season, but I want to encourage you today. If you see these 7 signs in your life, it may mean that God is getting ready to bless you beyond what you can imagine. There are times in life when everything seems to be going wrong. You face obstacles that feel overwhelming, setbacks that test your patience, and challenges that make you question whether God is even listening to your prayers. But my friends, let me tell you today, those challenges are not meant to break you. They are meant to prepare you. The trials you are facing may very well be a sign that God is setting you up for a blessing greater than you can imagine. Think about it. Before a tree can bear fruit, it must first be planted, and that seed must go through a process. It is buried in the darkness of the soil. It is pressed under the weight of the earth. It is rained on, beaten by the sun, and subjected to storms. But all of that is necessary for growth. Without that process, the seed would never sprout, and it would never fulfill its purpose. In the same way, God sometimes allows challenges in our lives, not to harm us, but to strengthen us for what is ahead. Consider Joseph in the Bible. Here was a young man with a dream, a vision given to him by God, that one day he would be a leader. But before he could step into his destiny, he was thrown into a pit by his own brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned. Can you imagine what that must have felt like? He must have questioned, God, where are you? Why is this happening to me? But what Joseph did not realize at the time was that each challenge he faced was part of God's preparation. The prison was not his final chapter. God was using those hardships to refine him, shape him, and prepare him for the palace. When we face difficulties, we often think that God is distant or that he has forgotten us. But the truth is, he is right there working behind the scenes. The Bible tells us in Romans 8:28 that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. That means even the struggles, even the disappointments, even the closed doors. God is using all of it for your good. Look at the life of David. Before he became king, he was just a shepherd boy tending to his father's sheep. One day he was called upon to fight Goliath, a giant that no one else dared to face. But David did not just wake up one morning and decide to fight a giant. No, God had been preparing him long before that moment. As a shepherd, David had already fought off lions and bears to protect his flock. What seemed like ordinary struggles, moments of danger and hardship, were actually God's training ground. The same sling that David used to fight off wild animals was the same weapon he used to take down Goliath. Every difficulty he faced as a shepherd prepared him for the moment he would stand before the giant. And my friends, the same is true for you. The struggles you are facing today are not meaningless. The challenges you are enduring are not wasted. God is using them to prepare you for what is coming next. Perhaps you are going through financial difficulties and you wonder why God is allowing this hardship. But what if he is teaching you wisdom, discipline, and faith, so that when he blesses you with abundance, you will know how to steward it wisely? Maybe you are dealing with rejection, people walking away from you, doors closing, opportunities slipping through your fingers. But what if God is removing the wrong people and closing the wrong doors so that he can bring the right ones into your life? There is a reason for every battle you are facing. Sometimes God allows us to go through seasons of testing because he wants to strengthen our faith. He wants to teach us endurance. He wants us to learn to trust him completely, not just when things are going well, but even when everything seems to be falling apart. Because it is in the fire that gold is refined. It is in the storm that our faith is made strong. Think about Jesus himself. Before he began his ministry, he was led into the wilderness to be tested. for 40 days and 40 nights. He fasted and was tempted by the devil. Why? Because the wilderness was a place of preparation. Before he could step into his calling, he had to go through a time of testing. And if the Son of God himself had to endure trials before stepping into his divine assignment, how much more should we expect to go through seasons of challenge before we receive God's blessings? So if you find yourself facing hardships, do not be discouraged. Do not let the enemy convince you that God has abandoned you. Instead, recognize that God may be preparing you for something greater. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Begin asking, Lord, what are you teaching me? How are you preparing me? Because when you shift your perspective, you will begin to see that what looks like a setback is actually a setup for something greater. Remember, every challenge is an opportunity for growth. Every trial is a stepping stone toward your destiny. And when you remain faithful, when you trust in God's plan, even in the midst of difficulty, you will see his blessings unfold in your life in ways you never expected. My friends, your struggles are not the end of your story. They are simply the training ground for the blessings that are coming. Hold on, stay faithful, keep trusting, because when God is preparing you, the blessing is already on its way. There are moments in life when we sense a change happening deep within us, even if we can't quite explain it. It feels like something is shifting, as though God is stirring the waters of our hearts, preparing us for something greater. It is a divine restlessness, not a feeling of anxiety, but an awareness that we are on the edge of something new. This sense of anticipation is often a sign that God is working behind the scenes, preparing us for a blessing we cannot yet see. Throughout Scripture, we see how God moves before he reveals his plans. He does not act randomly or without purpose. Every blessing, every new chapter, every breakthrough is preceded by a period of preparation. And one of the ways he prepares us is by placing within us a stirring, a shift in our spirit that tells us something is about to change. Think about Moses. He grew up in Pharaoh's palace, enjoying a life of privilege and power. But deep inside, there was a growing restlessness. He could no longer ignore the suffering of his people, the Israelites. That feeling, that inner shift, was not random. It was the hand of God preparing him for his destiny. And when the time was right, God called him to lead his people out of Egypt. The stirring in his spirit was a sign that God was getting ready to use him for something greater. Many of us have felt this kind of shift in our own lives. We may wake up one day and realize that certain things no longer satisfy us the way they once did. The job that once excited us now feels empty. The relationships that once felt fulfilling now seem shallow. The routine we once found comfort in now feels limiting. It's not because we are ungrateful. It's because God is preparing us for something new. He is awakening in us a desire for more. Sometimes this shift manifests as a deep yearning to grow spiritually. We find ourselves drawn to prayer, to scripture, to seeking God's presence in a way we never have before. We begin to hunger for a deeper understanding of his will. This is no accident. The closer we are to stepping into God's blessings, the more he calls us to himself. He wants our hearts to be fully aligned with him before he entrusts us with greater things. Other times this shift is marked by a sense of discomfort. Things that once felt normal now feel unsettling. The places we used to go, the habits we once enjoyed, even the people we surrounded ourselves with, suddenly they don't fit the way they used to. This can be confusing, even painful, but it is a necessary part of preparation. When God is about to elevate us, he often removes the things that can no longer serve us in the next season. He creates a holy discomfort to push us out of the familiar and into the unknown where his greater purpose awaits. Consider the story of Nehemiah. He was serving as a cupbearer to the king, living in comfort, when he heard about the ruins of Jerusalem. His heart was suddenly burdened in a way it had never been before. He could have ignored it, but instead he leaned into that shift. He prayed, he fasted, and in time God used him to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. That burden, that stirring in his heart was the very sign that God was preparing him for something greater. This same principle applies to us today. When God is preparing us for a major blessing, he first prepares our hearts to receive it. He places within us an awareness that change is coming. He causes us to feel unsettled in our current circumstances, not to frustrate us, but to move us forward. He plants dreams and desires in our hearts that push us toward his purpose. He draws us into deeper prayer, into moments of reflection, into a greater sensitivity to his voice. But here's the key: we must not ignore this shift. When we sense that God is stirring something within us, we must respond. Too often we resist change because it feels uncomfortable. We hold on to the familiar even when we know God is calling us to something greater. But blessings require obedience. When we feel the shift in our spirit, we must seek God in prayer and ask him, Lord, what are you doing in my life? What are you preparing me for? What steps do you want me to take? Sometimes God will reveal his plan clearly, and other times he will simply ask us to trust him in the process. Either way, we can be assured that he is guiding us towards something good. Jeremiah 29:11 reminds us of his promise. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. That means we don't have to be afraid of change. When God shifts something in our spirit, we can trust that he is leading us towards something far greater than we could ever imagine. If you are in a season where you feel this shift, where you sense that something is changing, but you don't fully understand what, don't be discouraged. Instead, lean into it. Seek God more deeply. Ask him to reveal what he is doing in your life. Be willing to let go of what no longer serves you, and most of all, trust that he is leading you toward his perfect plan. The shift in your spirit is not a coincidence. It is not something to ignore or dismiss. It is a sign that God is moving. It is evidence that he is preparing you for something greater. And if you stay faithful, if you keep seeking him, you will see the blessing he has in store for you. There are times in life when we experience unexpected shifts. Doors that we once walked through with ease suddenly close, while new doors appear seemingly out of nowhere. Relationships change, opportunities we counted on slip away, and paths we thought were certain become unclear. In these moments, we may feel confused, even frustrated, wondering why things are not working out the way we expected. But what we often fail to see is that God is moving behind the scenes, positioning us exactly where we need to be for his greater plan to unfold. God does not bless us without first preparing the way. When he has a blessing in store for us, he begins by arranging circumstances in such a way that we are aligned with his will. This often involves closing doors that are no longer meant for us, even if we don't understand why. Sometimes he removes people from our lives because they are not meant to walk with us into the next season. Other times, he prevents us from taking certain opportunities because he knows they will lead us away from his best. It may be painful in the moment, but every closed door is a sign that he is guiding us towards something better. Consider the story of Ruth. After losing her husband, she could have stayed in Moab clinging to what was familiar, but God had something greater in store for her. He positioned her in the right place at the right time by leading her to follow Naomi to Bethlehem. There she found herself in the field of Boaz, a man who would not only become her husband, but would also be part of the lineage of Jesus Christ. None of this happened by accident. Every step, every decision, every shift in her path was orchestrated by God. If she had resisted change, if she had insisted on staying where she was comfortable, she would have missed the greater blessing God had prepared for her. We too must recognize when God is shifting things in our lives. When an opportunity closes, instead of feeling defeated, we should ask, Lord, what are you making room for? When a relationship ends, instead of dwelling on loss, we should pray, God, what new connections are you bringing into my life? When we encounter delays or obstacles, instead of becoming impatient, we should trust that God is working things out in his perfect timing. He is always moving, always aligning things in ways we may not see in the moment. Sometimes God opens doors that we never expected. He places us in situations that seem beyond our qualifications, introduces us to people who can help us, or brings unexpected blessings our way. These divine alignments are not coincidences. They are signs that God is setting us up for something greater. Think about Esther. She was just an ordinary Jewish girl, but God positioned her in the palace of King Xerxes at exactly the right time to save her people. She did not force her way into that position. She did not manipulate events to make it happen. God orchestrated it all, aligning her steps so that she would be in the right place at the right time. But here's the key. When God opens a door, we must be ready to walk through it. Too often, fear and doubt hold us back. We question whether we are capable, whether we are worthy, whether we are truly hearing from God. But when God prepares a path for us, he also equips us to walk in it. If he is aligning things in our favor, we can step forward in confidence, knowing that he will provide everything we need. Divine alignment is not just about career opportunities or relationships. It also applies to our spiritual growth. Sometimes God removes distractions from our lives so that we can focus on him. He may close certain doors, not because they are bad, but because they are taking our attention away from what truly matters. He wants to position us where we will grow, where we will deepen our faith, where we will be able to receive his blessings fully. It is important to remain sensitive to God's leading. When we see doors closing or unexpected opportunities arising, we must seek him in prayer. We must ask for discernment to recognize his hand at work. Proverbs 3:5-6 tells us, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. This means that even when things do not make sense to us, we must trust that God is leading us exactly where we need to be. If you are in a season where doors are closing, do not be discouraged. If you feel uncertain about the path ahead, do not be afraid. God is not punishing you. He is positioning you. He is removing what no longer serves you so that he can bring you into something greater. He is aligning the right people, the right opportunities, and the right circumstances to lead you into his perfect plan. The key is to remain faithful. Do not force doors open that God has closed. Do not cling to what he is asking you to release. Instead, surrender to his will, trusting that his plans are always greater than anything we could imagine. Because when we allow God to align our lives according to his purpose, we will find ourselves walking in blessings beyond what we ever expected. There are moments in life when we feel a deep sense of urgency within us, a call to take action, to step forward in faith, to move in a direction we may not fully understand. This is one of the clearest signs that God is preparing us for something greater. He begins to stir our spirit, making it impossible for us to remain where we are. It is as if he is saying, now is the time. When this happens, we must be willing to obey even when we don't have all the answers. Throughout Scripture, we see that God calls people to take action before they see the full picture. He gives instructions that require faith, that demand trust, that push us out of our comfort zones. When he told Abraham to leave his homeland, he didn't tell him exactly where he was going. He simply said, go to the land I will show you. Abraham could have hesitated, asking for more details, waiting for certainty, but he didn't. He obeyed, and because of his obedience, he walked into the promise that God had prepared for him. This is how God operates. He does not always give us the full blueprint. He often gives us just one step, one instruction, one opportunity to trust him. And it is in that moment of obedience that we unlock the blessings he has in store for us. Too many times we delay obedience because we are waiting for all the details to make sense. We want to be sure that everything will work out before we take the first step. But faith does not work that way. Faith is about trusting God even when we don't see the full picture. It is about saying, Lord, I don't know what's next, but I trust that you do. Consider the story of Peter. When he saw Jesus walking on the water, he asked, Lord, if it is you, tell me to come to you on the water. And Jesus simply said, come. Now, Peter could have hesitated. He could have said, Lord, give me a guarantee that I won't sink. But instead, he stepped out of the boat. He acted in faith. And as long as he kept his eyes on Jesus, he walked on water. It was only when he allowed fear to creep in that he began to sink. The lesson here is powerful. When God calls us to step out, we must trust him completely. If we focus on him, we will experience the miraculous. But if we allow fear and doubt to take over, we may miss what he has prepared for us. God's call to action is often uncomfortable. It requires us to move beyond what is familiar, beyond what feels safe. It may mean taking a new job, moving to a different city, starting a ministry, or letting go of something we have held onto for too long. It may mean speaking up when it's easier to stay silent, or taking a risk when it's easier to remain in place. Whatever it is, obedience is the key. When we respond to God's leading, he makes a way. One of the greatest examples of this is found in the story of Joshua. After Moses passed away, God commanded Joshua to lead the Israelites into the promised land, but there was a problem. The Jordan River stood in their way. It was at flood stage, impossible to cross. God could have simply parted the waters before they stepped in, but he didn't. Instead, he instructed the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant to step into the water first. It was only after they obeyed, after they put their feet in the river, that God stopped the waters and made a dry path for them to cross. If they had waited for the river to part before stepping in, they would have never moved forward. Their blessing was on the other side, but they had to take the first step in faith. This is how God works in our lives. He places opportunities before us, but he requires us to step out in faith before the blessing is revealed. Too often, we hesitate. We let fear hold us back. We make excuses, telling ourselves that we will act when we feel ready, when the circumstances are perfect, when we have all the answers. But delayed obedience is still disobedience. And when we refuse to act, we risk missing out on what God has prepared for us. If we look at the great men and women of faith throughout history, we see a common theme. They were people of action. They did not sit back and wait for the perfect conditions. They moved when God told them to move. They trusted his voice more than they trusted their own fears. And because of their obedience, they stepped into incredible blessings. So how do we recognize when God is calling us to take action? Sometimes it is a persistent nudge in our spirit, a feeling that we cannot shake. Other times, it is an open door that requires us to move quickly. It may come through confirmation in his word, through wise counsel, or through circumstances that make it clear that staying where we are is no longer an option. However he speaks, our responsibility is to respond. Obedience is not always easy, but it is always worth it. When we trust God enough to take action, even when we don't have all the details, we position ourselves to receive his blessings. We demonstrate our faith, and we invite his power to work in our lives. If you feel that God is calling you to move, do not ignore it. Do not let fear keep you from stepping forward. Trust that if he is asking you to act, he has already gone before you to prepare the way. He is not asking you to have all the answers. He is simply asking you to trust him. And when you do, you will see his hand move in ways you never imagined.